guys, welcome to Partially Impartial. I'm Jerrick Naylor, and this week we'll be discussing capitalism, the economy, and recent military conflicts that have been sparking up lately. We brought back on two of our past guests, so that being said, welcome back to the show, Sheldon and Justin.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this week I wanted to, but before I get into that, let's start off with the coronavirus update that we've been doing. We haven't talked about the numbers for a while, and definitely not as many interesting things going on with the numbers as when we first started the show, but there is a couple things coming up, so I figure I'll update our audience here. We passed 8 million confirmed cases the other day. We're currently at 8.4 million. And, like we've said many, many times, that's probably not nearly accurate to what the reality is likely we're missing probably millions and millions of cases because there's just no way we're going to be able to catch everything like this. And even though I still hear from people that they think there's a lot of cases being faked and put in that aren't there to try and make it seem higher than it is. And I actually read this article that it said tens of thousands of tests had been double counted. And the person who posted it, I know what they were thinking was that means that the actual case count, the confirmed cases are much lower. But I read through the article, and this is something I've heard from multiple sources, is that the countries have actually been inflating the amount of tests that they're doing to make it look like they're doing better at testing than they actually are. So really, the article that was used by some to make it appear as if the cases were lied, it was actually just the countries trying to make their numbers look smaller. So that's something that I've noticed this entire time, is that the government agenda is not to make this look bigger than it is. It's actually to make it look smaller than it is. And, that was very, very apparent from the very beginning, because I had heard about this through Chris Martenson and other sources who had been watching China very closely, and the government just ignored it and swept it under the rug, and just waited till they absolutely had to start talking about it, and then they started talking about it, and then they waited until they absolutely had to start closing things down, and then they closed things down. They were definitely not ahead of the curve trying to bring this about. They were doing everything they possibly could to avoid having to make this become an issue. And if you need proof of that, just look at all of Trump's speeches going back. He definitely underplayed it and basically has continued to underplay it throughout this whole thing. So I'm really not exactly sure where people get this narrative that this is the government trying to scare everybody, because from my perspective, it's been the opposite. So
yeah.
Do you guys have anything to say about that? Actually, I know that's kind of a specific topic before I go ahead and jump down to the numbers.
Nothing really, other than I agree that Trump has downplayed it way too much. So
yeah, they're definitely downplaying it. Like if it gets bad and we shut down again, his chances of re-election are over. The stock market's going to collapse almost immediately. Like they're going to do everything in their power to downplay this, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on the stock market and what we think that's going to do in a little bit here. So looking at the numbers here, we're still seeing quite a bit of cases in the U.S. We definitely haven't seen the daily new cases start to go down. Looking at the tests over here, I haven't been keeping too good of track on the tests. We're up to 26 million total tests, so we're definitely keeping a very high level of testing, probably still increasing to some degree. I know we were doing 200,000 per day near the beginning, and I believe we ramped up to over 400,000. So we're probably somewhere around 500,000 tests per day now. And so, you compare that to 26,000 active cases, and it kind of gives you an idea of how many positives they're getting, the ratio there. Definitely seeing deaths go down in the U.S. We're most days we're under 1,000 still, and on the Sundays and the lowest days, which is always the lowest because of the lag in reporting. It seems like Sunday and Monday are always much lower, and then Tuesday and Wednesday it seems like they kind of catch up for everything they missed Sunday, and Monday. And so, yeah, under 1,000 deaths per day in the U.S. That's still quite a, if you picture, we had 809 Americans die today over the past 24 hours over this virus. And that's another thing that I get so much pushback for, is that people have read in an article or seen in a YouTube video that hospitals are incentivized to increase the deaths, and there's all these bad incentives for the government and hospitals and everybody involved to make that number seem higher. So you say that 800 Americans died, and that's the first thing they think of is, well, everyone's just lying about it, and they're just marking off these deaths as COVID deaths, even though they're not. And that's just something that I would completely disagree with. But this is really interesting thing that I'm seeing, especially on social media, is just this complete separation of people to be able to have a productive conversation about it. It's just, and this is all just data that we're all just having come in. None of us are out gathering the data, so we're all basically just relying on the data. So there's no real way to prove that all of these people are dying, or to prove that the hospital is lying about it. So to me, I have kind of just given up on trying to convince deniers, because it seems there's no way to actually do that. And misinformation is just peaking. So yeah, it's just insane. I come across like more misinformation than I do real information by a long shot, except for through the trusted sources that I have followed for over a year now. But other than that, just Googling and just going through on social media, it's all misinformation. Even the things saying the virus is serious, it's like, oh, they get a couple things wrong here and there. And then even like from the CDC and the WHO, they get so many things wrong. Like the WHO just barely released a statement saying that everything they said about asymptomatic cases was false, and that there's no worry about asymptomatic spread. And it's actually a kernel of truth in that. But the thing is there's a difference between asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic. So asymptomatic is when you don't show symptoms at all the whole time you have the sickness. And there is some questions as to whether or not those people can spread it or not. It seems like there's some doubts that maybe those asymptomatic people are actually not spreading it. But that doesn't account for the real threat, which is the pre-symptomatic people, which are people that will develop symptoms and are for sure contagious. We know this, it's been proven, but just haven't showed symptoms yet. So those are the real things that we have to worry about, is the pre-symptomatic people. But yet people hear that the WHO has retracted their statements on asymptomatic, and they're like, oh, the whole thing's fake. They overblowed the whole thing. It's all a lie, as if they should even be listening to the WHO or the CDC, period. It's quite fascinating when the deniers, I hear the deniers quote the CDC and the WHO more than the people who have actually been following the real truth about the virus, because the CDC and the WHO have gotten so many things wrong. Like Fauci straight up came out and said that there's no reason to wear masks, and wearing masks would be harmful. I can't tell you how many people I've seen comment that article saying, look, WHO does not suggest wearing masks. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? WHO and CDC? You really?
Well, the other thing too is that I mean, if Trump's done anything right, and I did a little bit of research on it, but separating from the WHO as a country was actually not a terrible move, because of the fact that they're in China's pocket, and they've been giving a whole ton of misinformation this whole time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we pay in way more than we should proportionate to other countries. And yeah, I definitely think it was a deal that was worth reevaluating totally. Like I definitely don't hate that decision either. And I think like one of the issues you're talking about, about like asymptomatic versus pre-symptomatic, is this this issue I've noticed in our country where people are just like scientifically illiterate. They
No,
they like don't
everybody's an
even know
expert.
what
What are
the
you
fuck
talking
means.
about?
I think that's part of the issue though, is like You know, we should know enough to know that we don't know. Like, we don't even understand that much.
But that's the thing, is the media wants to convince you that you do know.
Foolish.
Or that they know.
Yeah, that they know, and that now that they told you, now that you know.
Well, yeah, because they like frame themselves like they're our buddies, and it's like, yeah, we just give you information because we love the truth, and this just makes us happy. And it's like, well, you don't make money?
Hold up.
It's like, oh yeah, you're a business first, of course.
That's one of the interesting things about going back to the WHO is the people that are blinded by their hate for Trump. I saw articles coming out saying, look, the Trump is withdrawing us from the WHO at a time where we need them the most. And like, if you didn't know anything about the WHO and you just know that you hated Trump, then boom, that would be perfect ammunition that you could use against him to justify your hate from him, and automatically go down the path that that's a wrong decision, without even considering that we've been getting totally screwed over by China in many different avenues. And that is one thing I do kind of sort of agree with Trump on, is that he's taking a really hard stance with China. But so just to finish up these numbers real quick, Brazil is something we've talked about. They're still getting hit really hard. 1,200 deaths in Brazil today, 31,000 cases. I don't even know if I've seen them get over 30,000 for a while. I think they might have broken our daily record over there in Brazil, which is insane because they've done 1/10 of the tests per capita that we have. So they're just absolutely not on top of their testing. So shit is probably going crazy in Brazil right now with cases and deaths. And India also really starting to spread there. They only had 340 deaths today, but I saw 2,000 deaths yesterday, which was by far the highest I've seen from them. Now, I know a lot of times when this data comes in, sometimes it kind of gets built up and then they present it all in one day. And so it can make it seem like 2,000 deaths happened in one day, but really maybe it was like a week's worth of deaths or something. I don't know if that's the case with India, but they definitely haven't gotten 2,000 more than just that one time. Spain and Italy, they were getting hit the hardest at the beginning. They're both actually doing quite well. I've actually heard reports from Italy that when they have these serious patients come in, they're reading that they're having a lot less of a concentration of the virus load when they test them. And so there's a lot of theories going around why that may be, why it seems like maybe in certain areas the virus is not quite as potent as it was. And, I'll just let our audience theorize as to why that may be. One of the more interesting theories I've heard is, if this was a virus manipulated in the lab, then it may not be very suitable for a real world environment. So maybe perhaps as it replicates billions and billions of times going from person to person, maybe perhaps there's something in the real world environment that is it's not perfectly suited for, so it kind of gets weaker and weaker over time. That's a theory I heard from Chris Martinson. Also, I have no idea whether or not that's true. Mexico getting hit really hard. They're our neighbor here in U.S., just below us. So, there's probably a good amount that we have in common with them. They had 730 deaths just today. I've been looking at Canada. They're actually doing really good. So I don't know. I mean, they've done almost as much testing per capita as we have. I know they locked down much earlier and have had a much more cohesive community around it. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to touch on with the numbers. Definitely still a real threat. We definitely still a real thing we need to take serious, and especially with the wave that we're probably pretty likely to see to some extent around the protest. Now, the only question really is, will it be a really significant extent, or will it kind of just be a slight increase? But yes, definitely don't believe Trump when he says that, we're completely over this. This is exactly how countries get hit with a really hard second wave, is because they let their guard down too early. So let's do everything we can to avoid doing that and just keep trucking on through. I know it's definitely a weird time, and you need some perseverance and endurance to just mentally make it through something just so long like this. But yeah, I think the people who are taking this seriously can make a pretty big difference, even if most of the nation's not going to do that. I think the people that are will go a long way. Hopefully, that's how I like to think about it anyway. But me and Justin were having a pretty interesting conversation that I wanted to pick up on, just about capitalism in general, and we went off on tangents in many different directions. But there was one point he kind of made it, and then it kind of clicked in my head. A really interesting thing that I had never really considered to a very thorough degree. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of financial podcasts, and they have somewhat of a right leaning mindset of free market capitalism, and they praise the whole idea of how free markets are basically the solution to everything. And there is a lot of good points that they make. I think free markets can definitely provide a really efficient way of creating jobs and creating innovation, because the idea behind it is supposed to be that, if you let nature, well, just let the free market take care of everything, then it really incentivizes people to act in the most efficient ways and to create the best product, which will then gain them the most money. And a lot of people in the podcast I listen to, at least, their idea would be that the incentive behind free market capitalism would be innovation. And that is true to a degree, but I think there's a slight thing in there that is really important to point out, that really is true to the world that we're in today. And the slight difference is the actual incentive for capitalism and free markets in general is not actually to incent it to create innovation or efficiency. It's not actually that. The true incentive is just simply to make money. And it just so happens to be that innovation is usually the best way to make a bunch of money, but not all the time. And so if the true incentive is to make money, then that means at a certain point, capitalism is going to turn around on itself and turn away from efficiency and innovation and actually do whatever they can to make a bunch of money. And the example him and me were talking about was the medical industry. And we all think that we have the best medical system here in the U.S., and to a certain degree we do, but we also have the most predatory medical system in the U.S. So I just wanted to see what your opinion on that topic was, Justin.
What do you mean by predatory?
Well, just the fact that
Sorry.
they don't necessarily, their goal when you go in a lot of different scenarios is not just to make you better. Their goal is to get as much money from you as possible, which sometimes actually works against getting you healthy. I've seen countless people, they go in and they don't actually treat the problem. They basically give them prescriptions that's going to sign them up for this monthly subscription to the medical industry. And then those prescriptions are going to start causing more and more health problems. And then they need to get treated for those too. And it creates this cascading effect where now they need to make sure they go to the doctor's office monthly, or just whatever they can do to make it so they can get as most money out of them rather than healing them. So that's one example.
Oh God, yeah, there's a lot to that for sure. Like with the medical thing, it's just like certain things in our society shouldn't be privatized. Like there shouldn't be a profit incentive for you or your mother or your family, your neighbor, anyone to be sick and not well. Like there shouldn't be a way for you to profit off of a body in prison. Like why are we privatizing these things? That seems foolish to me. But I get, like, let me step back for a sec. So you're talking about, like, you listen to people who really advocate for the free market. So, kind of like the Wealth of Nations, Age of Reasons kind of stuff, like Thomas Paine, when we're starting the country, they developed classical economics, and that's just pertaining strictly to the free market, and it's like kind of Darwinist in nature, like, well, if your business is good, it'll win, it'll overtake other businesses, it'll create innovation, it'll do this, that, and the other, and the bad businesses will just fail, and the weak will just cull themselves out naturally. And then we reach this point, shortly after the turn of the century, we had all the monopolies. There was the whole Rockefeller scandal, the Warbucks. They had like the oil and the railroad industries became horrifyingly monopolized. And then they signed the Sherman Antitrust Acts and broke them apart. But when you have a free market, I don't see like how a completely free market could end in any way other than monopolies, personally. But then like, let's move a little bit further forward in history. So even though we had the monopolies, they broke them up, and we were still, like, as a nation, largely committed to classical economics. And then during World War II, Franklin Roosevelt took over, and his economic strategist developed Keynesian economics.
Yeah.
And that's this economic. Yeah. That's more what we're involved now, which is not classical economics at all. It's not free market, but it's what we're doing. It's what we've been doing.
Wait, quick
Like,
question. Is
Yeah.
classical economics ever referred to as Austrian economics?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Same thing.
Yeah, same.
Okay.
But Keynesian economics is more what we have going on now, where it's kind of a free market, but the government gets involved, and I don't know. It's like we really haven't had a free market for a very long time, and people really think about socialism as this like big bad evil thing, but we've been a socialist country for a long time. The police, the military, that's all socialism. And when people talk about defunding the police, like, anyone who's anti-socialism should be signing up for that. You should be just on board for having private polices that the neighborhood funds and like saving the tax money. Like, if you're really anti-socialist, you should totally be advocating for defunding the police too. But
If you really knew what socialism meant.
yeah, which
Right?
most people
Most
don't
people
get this
don't.
shit.
Yeah.
No, it's like a trigger word. It's like, oh, communists, they're just bad. We don't quite know why, but they're the bad guys. We're the good guys.
Isn't it actually the Socialist Party now that's involved with defunding the police?
I'm not sure what the present Socialist Party's doing. I don't think we have a very strong Socialist Party.
I've definitely heard socialist leaders and things like that, say the word democratic socialism, or get the crowd cheering behind socialism.
Democratic socialists are totally advocating for defunding the police.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Totally. But then another thing you're talking about, you're talking about how like economics should largely, the free market should be driven by like incentive and innovation. Well, an issue now, and this is something they teach every single student at a business college in America, is that value is not defined as like you've made something better. Like if you give me a car and I paint it, like, you would think like, oh yeah, I added the value by giving it color. Like, that makes sense. Like, I made the object more valuable. But the way they teach it to business students is that value is the perception of increased value to the consumer. So it's like that's a very big difference. So then there's this thing that I really enjoyed as a concept, and I wish more people talked about it, but it's called rent seeking. Rent, R-E-N-T, seeking, in case I feel like I mumbled a little bit there. But it's this concept where you're strictly creating artificial value and then like trying to collect like your rent in the transaction, when like you've done nothing but kind of manipulated consumers. And that's one of these issues with America right now, is that it's just totally consumer beware. We're on our own and everybody's just after us and after our money. And because there's this huge stereotype that all Americans are wealthy, we're targets for international scams too. Like at my college, Cal State Long Beach, there was this big hacking where I don't know where these people are from. There's an FBI investigation going on, but they hacked into the school's email and they were sending emails to students from the school's email saying like, oh, you've gotten this job opportunity from the school to go do product reviews, and then they send you a check, and then you go cash the check and you go buy like some gift cards and write a little survey about the experience, and then the check bounces and you end up losing $3,000. And like, this is the kind of stuff that we become vulnerable to.
I think kind of an example that came to mind. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're talking about, but it's kind of that creating fake value. So I've been trying to get advertising for our YouTube videos, and it's a pretty tricky process if you don't know what you're doing. And so I decided instead of going through the AdWords revenue, which is through YouTube and Google, and they're all connected. I went onto Google and I was like, drive traffic to YouTube video, and just seeing if I can just pay some service to bring more views to our video, since it's a really challenging thing to get views and start a new channel. And this website came up, and it was basically I went to it, and they all they did was they went through. So you paid them money, and then they did the AdWords part for you. So basically, they pretended to be their own advertising service, and you type in a simplified version of info that you would type into the AdWords thing, and then they just use that to go and sign up for the actual AdWords thing, and of course they charge their extra 50% or whatever on top of it. Is that the rent seeking thing you're talking about?
That would be an example. Someone could argue it's like, well, their time has value, but that really is rent seeking. Like they're not adding anything. They're doing something you could have done yourself, and they charge you a premium.
Yeah, and especially if they make it seem like they're their own thing. And I'm sure there's countless other examples I can't really just think of, but that idea really just resonates, of kind of creating a false perception of value instead of actually how people would normally think of it, actually creating real value. So let's go ahead, let's walk
Well,
this
real quick, I don't want to advertise for anyone too much, but on the Joe Rogan podcast with Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein, which is like, God, it's like a 3-hour podcast, but they talk about rent seeking pretty nicely in that one. It's a really good podcast. It's probably one of Joe Rogan's better ones, in my opinion. But just wanted to kind of shout out like a good discussion of that. If you have 3 hours, you don't know what to do with.
Yeah, Joe Rogan always goes on for a long time. His podcasts are good. I haven't listened to him too much lately. I feel like he's quite the generalist, and he's really good at briefly touching on any topic in the world he can really touch on, but he doesn't really dive too much into the complexities. So I've been kind of steering away from Joe Rogan more to like financially targeted podcasts, because I want to learn the details of it. So Joe Rogan's good in kind of pointing you in the right direction, and then once you know a topic that you didn't know you were going to be interested in, like I remember hearing Peter Schiff on Joe Rogan's podcast multiple times, and he really goes over the economy in really good detail. So so we were talking about how we're kind of coming into this, or how the way I see it is basically our economy right now. I can't remember who said this. I think it might have been Martin Luther King, actually. He said we have socialism for the rich and the 1%, and we have like rugged individualism for everybody else. And so, like what you were saying, how basically a free market basically is going to lead to a monopoly one way or another, because the incentive is to get a bunch of money, and the best way to get money is to monopolize a certain part of the economy. So it's pretty much bound to lead to that. So basically what we've had happen is we've had that monopolization happen, even though we have laws against it. It's kind of just happened in a stealth way. And then they've gotten so big that they're now involved with the government, and now they can use the government to create laws to make them even more money. And one of the biggest avenues that I've noticed for this basically more focused extraction of wealth, because the incentive is money. So now they're turning directly toward the money printer itself, actually, to get their money. And obviously printing money is really bad, because it's going to at some point create inflation, or at least in theory it should, even though that has somewhat been proven wrong, or at least according to the official statistics, there hasn't been too much inflation. lately. But so I think that's one of the biggest topics when it comes to our economy, and just one of the biggest, one of the most overlooked things, because it's so hard to understand exactly how the money printing is working. And if I could just explain it a little bit, I want, so I have a whole list of things here. I want to just basically now let's paint a picture of how the economy is, where it sits right now, because it's in a very interesting spot right now. So we'll paint that picture, and then we'll talk about what we think is going to happen from here, and possibly how you could use that as an investment strategy, or just a life strategy. Because if you have an accurate understanding of where the world and the economy is going, then you could make better choices in life based on that. So the way that they're using the money printing now to get wealth directly to them and into equities is basically the Fed just prints money and then buys assets. So if like lately, they just barely announced that they're going to start buying individual corporate bonds, which they've been buying junk bond ETFs for quite a while now, which was completely illegal. It still is illegal, but they've been creating these special purpose vehicles, this alphabet soup of acronyms, and there's like 20 of them now. And each one of those SPVs can buy things basically in the name of the Fed. So because the bond market and the stock market fundamentally are not healthy in any way, shape, or form. But if the Fed will just come in and buy it, usually at a premium, then if you play that and you have a good communication with the Fed, then you're going to be first in line to that newly printed money. And that actually adds money directly into the entire economy. Like the way it will add money into basically because the Fed hasn't actually been buying stocks, but yet a common thing I hear is that the Fed is pumping up the stock market, and they actually have to a degree, just not directly, because the Fed has been buying government bonds for a long time. Their balance sheet has gone from 4.5 trillion up to 7 trillion recently. And so that's basically just government debt that nobody else wants to buy. So the government buys it. And so basically there's a lack of investment that has been going into government bonds because yields have been so awful. So when the Fed steps in and buys that debt, then it frees up that new money, which can now go into the stock market. So, but from the Fed buying bonds, they are through a backdoor sort of way, they're boosting equities. And so I think that's, because the stock market, something we've talked about for a while now, Justin and CJ, who's not on the show today, is that everything is pointing to a market crash. But the real question is, will the Fed even allow that? I know I've just said a mouthful, but what do you think on that before I move on?
Ooh, that was a lot.
Yeah.
The junk bond thing is such a big problem. I mean, it's like that's exactly not exactly, but it's so similar to what happened in 2008. Like they were putting all of these like shit mortgage backed, they're lumping up all these shit loans into these junk mortgage backed securities, and like we were buying those up. Like we know that buying these like junk bonds and securities in large quantities is stupid. Like we know that it doesn't work. I don't know. Like I don't think they have any real plan besides just printing money forever.
Yeah, and it doesn't work long run, but it does work short term. And they've proven that since the 2008 crashes. You can actually print your way out of a pretty serious crisis. Like the banks were on the verge of collapsing, and they basically did, and they actually basically did this time as well. And I was actually telling people when this coronavirus thing was first starting to happening, a mistake I made. I told people, maybe you should withdraw your money from a bank because it's pretty uncertain whether that money's actually going to be in there. And it actually ran into a real problem. But of course, I underestimated their ability to print their way out of it. And of course, I feel like that's one of the main mistakes that a lot of economists and investors have made the past 20 years is they're like, holy shit, something's really wrong. There's going to be a real crisis. And then they underestimate how much the money printing can actually come in and save everything. And so it definitely works to a degree, but I agree. They don't really have a way to make the economy healthy again. And it's the more money printing they do, they're only adding to the problem. They're trying to fix a debt crisis by adding on more and more debt. So that's why I personally do not have a positive outlook for the economy and for the stock market, just in general, just because we have so much shit and so much debt that we've swept under the rug that it's actually all starting to catch up to us now. I know, the global economy has been slowing down in real terms for more than a decade, but they just twist the numbers a little bit and make it look like there's actually GDP, when if you adjust it for real inflation, which is actually been about 5% in the US if we measured the same as we did in the 90s. So that's not just some random number. That's how we used to measure it, actually. If we measured it the exact same way, we would be at 5%, which is a huge amount of inflation. Honestly, that's, most people probably don't even get a 5% raise each year. So how do you see, like, because obviously we're in a really turbulent time in the economy right now. What's your outlook like 5 to 10 years from now? Do you think there will actually be a point where there be value in stocks where you can come in, buy, and actually expect a growing future in our economy?
One of the things I was going to mention, though, like kind of on what you were saying about how we've been seeing a decline in the overall worth of the dollar and everything for over a decade. I remember back around the time of Hurricane Katrina, when I was in middle school, there was a story that was on the news that talked about how people should go and spend their money right now and this year, because this is going to be right now the dollar is at its peak and it's worth the most money, or it's worth the most out of all currencies in the world. And I think this was probably back in 2004, 2003, 2004. And it's interesting, like I kind of have subconsciously, in a way, paid attention to that throughout the years, and watched the American dollar drop below the euro, and it's just continued, especially even since 2008, 2009, when um, Obama bailed us out. You know, that was just that was just him keeping us from going into a depression. So instead, we went into a recession. Right now, everything that we've been doing, like you said, over this course of time, has so like consequentially put us in this position where I don't know. I think you've talked about it a little bit before, Jerrick, but like the dollar is almost bound to fail within the next 10 years, I think.
I would almost have to agree that there's a decent chance that the dollar fails within 10 years and we have to just like adopt a new currency and just like absolve the debt. I mean, because you said like long term, the printing money doesn't work. But at the end of the day, like there's no model to base that on. In theory, printing money could just work forever. We could print $100 trillion a year and it could just work. Like maybe, who knows? I don't think so, but that seems to be their attitude. There was a lot of very smart people in 2008 who were saying we should just let the bubble pop now. And here we are 12 years later, and the debt's a way bigger number. And now when you talk about like letting the bubble pop, it's like, when before it's like, yeah, this is going to be rough, maybe like the Great Depression again. Now it's like we might have the worst economic collapse of modern history if we let this bubble pop as it is. Like, I don't know, man.
But it's like this scary thing that if we let it pop, that it's the fear of the unknown, right? That's literally what it is. Though we know what happened back in the Great Depression, we're in a bigger bubble right now than we were at the Great Depression. So, like, is the fall going to be harder? And what at what cost? For like people's just life in general, is it? And I mean, yeah, there's that idea to take into perspective, but honestly, like, let it happen. We need to let it happen. If we don't let it happen, then every year that we let it go on without letting it fail and correct itself on its own, it's never going to find balance, and it's just going to be even. I think it's going to make it that much worse when it actually bursts and it does collapse.
Yeah, it could lead to like the collapse of our nation entirely if we
Yeah.
just keep putting it off. You know, I mean, it's like I don't know. This is like it's such an irresponsible way to manage a country, and I can't help but feel a little ageist for thinking this, but I think it's partially because all the people running this won't be around in 20 years. They don't have to deal with these real consequences. Like we're gonna have to live with these decisions that are being made.
Yeah, that probably does play a role. And it's so fascinating that this just lines up perfectly with the fourth turning and this specific decade, how all of the shit that we've ignored is actually lining up perfectly with that 90-year cycle. And it's interesting because you said that the problem has gotten so big that we almost like can't let it fail now, because if we were to let it fail, then there'd be banks collapsing, there would be hedge funds going out, there'd be 401ks blowing up, the market would literally stop functioning. And we basically saw that with the coronavirus thing. There was certain parts of the market that just stopped functioning. The bond market stopped functioning, but yet the Fed steps in and corrects everything. So that really shows that if left to its own accord right now, it would just come to a grinding halt, and it would just crash. So we're basically in this downward spiral where we have to print money, and also the more money we print means we're going to have to print more money in the future. So this thing, whatever is going on here, is going to have to come to an end at some point. And you bring up the Great Depression. It's interesting because during the Great Depression, the way that they measured unemployment was completely different than the way we do now. And they actually counted government employees on the unemployment number because they knew how inefficient it was to have large government. They actually decided to throw those employees in the unemployment thing so they could try and keep that number as low as possible. We absolutely do not do that today. And also we use a completely different reading of the economy to determine that. So going off of that, the Great Depression was really not necessarily this awful time of black and white pictures of people waiting in food lines and all the things that we've read in history books. 70% of people were still employed. So it wasn't like this horrible time to be alive or anything. It was just a big downturn in the way the economy was going. And if you measure unemployment the same way that we did back then, and you measure that, let's say you measure it before COVID came, because obviously COVID came, totally fucked with all the jobs. But even before COVID came, we were still about at the same level of unemployment as we were during the Great Depression. And now we're actually higher. So that really shows. And a lot of people would say, well, I don't see people waiting in food lines and all the things like that. But yet
I have.
49% of, yeah, I mean, there actually has been some of that lately.
Yeah, I see it in like LA and Long Beach.
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah, and but kind of in a more stealth way, 40 before COVID, 49% of households received some sort of government assistance. So there's definitely the government stepping in to help the less fortunate people. And now that number is probably like 70 or 80% now, because almost every household has somebody that's getting unemployment or something. But so we're painting this whole picture here, and like you said, the next thing on the chopping block is going to be the dollar. And when I say the dollar, I basically mean all currencies, because the dollar is going to be the last to go, and we're on a world. The dollar is the world reserve currency, so it's basically, I know 70% of trade happens in the U.S. dollar, of global trade. So it's really this global currency, basically. But what do you think if that system does come to a question, which is definitely something I agree with and have been preparing for? How do you guys picture the monetary system that comes after this?
I think that we'll probably end up going towards the realm of cryptocurrency.
I agree
Honestly,
entirely. I entirely
um,
agree with that.
I think that it'll there's a couple benefits to it, that it's easier to measure the value of a crypto than the dollar, and that you can accurately I think there's a better way to accurately know how much crypto you have and how much gold is backing that, if that's what's backing it at that point. Um, you know, uh,
Well, I think most cryptos technically don't have anything backing it, but they maintain scarcity through their programming, and that's where the true value comes
okay,
in
Yeah, that
crypto, is the scarcity.
the scarcity is super
interesting.
important to
Okay,
like maintaining a real currency.
but yeah, I definitely think it'll be crypto. I'm sure you have something to say on that,
Yeah, and I
Justin.
think well, I mostly agree with you. I mean, like I think having a cryptocurrency solves a lot of problems. Like transactions become traceable and it could eliminate the existence of things like offshore banks, which I think are like this really not spoken about problem that's bad for all of us. If you have that much money offshore, like not being taxed, well, we're all paying this massive percentage of our wages.
You mean Jeff
Like
Bezos?
that's totally disgusting. Yeah, people like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think a cryptocurrency is probably more likely than going to something like gold or silver or platinum or oil or anything like that. I just think like moving forward, they would rather have something they have more control over than something like gold.
And
Like they want to be able to cast as many like they'd want to have more control than they could have with gold.
I wonder, though, too, if the collapse of um, the dollar and the American economy would, in a way, bring about, because if the dollar is what's the most heavily traded uh, monetary value in the market, then it's almost like there is a global currency that's accepted. I wonder if a cryptocurrency would then become something that is um, globally accepted, or a
Uh,
global currency.
That would be
I,
nice.
I think I think if we backed it for sure, but like depending on what goes on with China's economy, there's a decent chance they just become the global standard currency as well. The Chinese yuan, like they might just be
Well,
the top dog.
nobody accepts the yuan at all right now.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
unless China became like the next global
give
power
it
or
give
something.
it
But as
10
of right
years,
now,
dude. They've
no.
got like 4 times as many people as us, and they've been knocking off all of our technology for 20 years. They've stolen all of our manufacturing, and we're falling apart. I mean, like they're in a good position, man.
They are, until all their people die
Sort
of
of.
coronavirus.
Yeah. Yeah, super concerning, but
But
I think one of the biggest problems
looks like
China
more of us
has,
died from coronavirus than
yeah,
them,
no,
though,
no,
you
for
know?
sure.
that's
Yeah,
what, but I think China is like a very dictatorship based, nation, and I think that their people just genuinely do not like the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they've got the whole Muslim concentration camp thing going on. They've got the organ harvesting thing going on. They are just extremely oppressive. Like, but yeah, they have been stealing a lot of our technology, and a lot of things do look good for them, especially like 5G and AI and all those next big steps in technology. It is definitely, I mean, and the U.S. and China are really coming to a clash right now. So I think something's got to give. What, you know, and they definitely want to be the top, and I know Russia wants to be involved in that somehow as well. So every country kind of has all these things up their sleeve. But what's interesting is China has actually been buying more gold than any other country right now. And Russia's been buying mass amounts of gold, and US central banks have also been buying mass amounts of gold. So, you know, they've been kind of hush hush about it. But in my opinion, based on researching this, so over the past 5,000 years, gold has been a valuable monetary object in one form or another in human history. And I know we always like to think of ourselves as evolving past history, but for the track record that gold has is very good. And there's been hundreds of times where an economy has gone into hyperinflation and then reverted back to gold. And it really looks like that all of these countries are preparing to go back to go to gold for some store of value. Well, I think what would be a really ideal currency, because I love cryptocurrencies and I love gold, I think a cryptocurrency backed with gold would be a phenomenal thing, because then you have the actual hard money of gold, which is perceived across the whole world as money and as something of value. And it's something that all the countries already have mass quantities of, besides Canada. And to back that with a cryptocurrency, so that way you can have the tracking and, you know, transferring money over the internet and things like that.
I mean, I just don't think there's enough gold to equate to what the global debt is. If we wanted to switch to like a global currency, you know, like at this point, you know, you can talk about what gold's done for 5,000 years, but there's never been an internet. I mean, they were never printing trillions of dollars. Like, it's really hard to compare anything to history right now. I mean, there's some big game changers that are happening that, like, you know, like based on historical models of the economy, things shouldn't be existing the way they are now. So it's like those models are becoming useless in front of our eyes. And that's something I observe at school is like you're teaching me based off these models, but these models are falling apart in real time. They're not holding up anymore. They're being challenged by too many
So
things. So like
if
I'm
gold,
very skeptical of models personally.
so if gold isn't going to be part of the next monetary system, which I definitely think it is, I think it's a 99% chance it will be involved somehow.
I didn't say it won't be involved. I just don't think it would. I don't think it would be like the global currency again, like it has been in human history, where it's like kings and everybody uses gold.
Well, gold and silver potentially.
Yeah, and
Like,
yeah, but I don't think either of those things personally. I just like I'm very skeptical about those things making that type of a comeback, because I just don't think there's enough to back the amount of debt we have. And I think that was part of the justification for dropping the gold standard in the first place, was like, well, if we don't have something real backing it, we can just assume infinite debt. Win-win. Not really, but you know, that's part of the justification. So like that's a big concern I have with something like gold. Whereas like we could make a cryptocurrency like to the quantity that we need and still have the scarcity that gold, like that's a good quality gold has, I definitely admit. But like, you know, we could create the quantity we need and still maintain the scarcity to
I think
uphold
if
value.
gold was valued in a more realistic sense, especially if all these central banks did adopt it as a money, then its intrinsic value would go up much higher. And we're talking, you know, thousands and thousands of tons of gold. Like you could you know, buy, you know, transfer money between countries through bars of gold. You know, I think that, I mean, because obviously we don't have enough gold to back the money that we have now, because the money's become worthless basically, you know. But if we had
But
a fixed
but the
thing,
debt is real. Like I agree that the money's worthless, but the debt is
but it won't
real.
be real
Which is,
if the currency system collapses.
no, but then we'll probably just be in anarchy.
I agree. If this does happen, there will have to be some serious World War III type of shit. Like the currency will not just like fall out and we'll just switch over to a new system in a smooth way. And like you said, China and Russia will probably take advantage of that opportunity to try and assert themselves as the next global power.
Oh yeah, people are in line. I mean, we've enjoyed our run, but I'm watching it come to an end. And like another thing with gold is like I'd have more faith in gold if that intrinsic value thing was more visible. Like every time they print more money, gold should jump. It's like, oh, there's more dollars, so like that's this scarce resource is definitely worth more immediately. And like it doesn't do that. And I don't know, like it just like it doesn't seem to like move the way that it should. Like it's still like even like because it was the gold standard, it never really had a real value. Like its value was always disrupted. And that like that could correct. And like I definitely like that I agree. There's definitely attractive qualities to gold. But I also believe in diverse investing.
Yeah,
Lots of eggs, lots of baskets, dude.
yeah, I agree. And like myself, I've got a bunch of gold, and I'm trying to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm waiting for a good time to do that because I do see a lot of potential in those. And a lot of people do see a lot of potential in cryptos, and especially millennials like us. But I do think that they're I mean, based on all the investors I listen to, all of the old school guys, they're the exact opposite of you. They think that crypto is much more of like a risky speculation, and that gold is like the for sure fire thing to get you through, any type of currency problems. And I think there's enough people in that camp that know historically that gold has survived the test of time thousands and thousands of years, while cryptos had just a rough decade. Though it does show tons of promise for the future of our monetary system, I do think, at least as a tool to conserve your purchasing power through a potential currency collapse, I think gold will do its job for that. And then perhaps if a cryptocurrency does come along, then maybe you can move your gold into that system.
Yeah, I mean, if you're worried about like the dollar completely collapsing, like yeah, gold's gonna have value. Like you'll be able to go buy food with gold for sure. But I think like a lot of those people you're referencing are a lot like my professors. And these are people who have degrees in finance and they're teaching at an institution for finance. That's what they're doing there. And I can say, at least like on my professor's behalf, like I can't speak to the people you're referencing, but like they don't really understand cryptocurrency. So they don't like it. Like they partially understand it. And I think that's part of the issue with like that stigma against it is they don't quite understand what it is or where it comes from or who made it. But they're like, well, gold's real, and I can wear gold, and I know gold has this model. And it's like, yeah, you guys always talk about your models, and guess what? You guys are wrong a lot nowadays because you keep looking at these models. Like that's just an observation I have. Like, so even though I'm at this institution, I take like what my professors say with a lot of scrutiny because like they'll be sitting there advocating for models that I'm watching not be true.
I think there's probably a good amount of difference between the people that I listen to and your professors. Probably some things in common. That some of the people I listen to would actually have some sort of degree, but a lot of them are like kind of the outcasts from the financial and the economic world. The one that all the Keynesians don't take seriously because they're more about the Austrian school of economics, which is not taking, it doesn't have anything to do with our current system. So they're kind of more the alternative finance is kind of what I listen to. But I definitely agree, if everyone in the world fully understood Bitcoin and crypto right now, then it would just take off. It would just go to the moon because it's such a beautiful, good idea. But it's just,
People would probably like willfully abandon the dollar
yeah,
if they really knew how it worked. Yeah, they'd be like, oh wait, fuck a dollar. This thing's stupid.
exactly. Yeah, it's a fascinating piece of technology that I don't fully understand. But there is that I can't remember exactly what the phrase is. It has something to do with the rate of adoption. I mean, regardless of how good of an idea it is, there does have to be that wave of people that come in and adopt it just to make it relevant. Even if it's the best technology in the world, it's still going to require that wave of people to transition over.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like exactly why the dollar is valuable, because there's no gold standard, there's nothing backing it. They can print it whenever, but because we collectively buy into its value, it has the value.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's all, I mean, really, when it really comes down to it, all value, even the value of gold, which I like so much, is still just an agreed upon thing between two people. Like it really, gold as a shiny object, it really doesn't have much value. I mean, I guess the thing that kind of gives it this perceived value is that it takes so much effort to mine and purify gold, and that level of effort is always going to be there. So that's what gives gold scarcity, and it actually gets harder and harder as time goes by, because it's the easier mines are all depleting, and we have to go to harder and harder sources. So, and it's fascinating because crypto does that through the coding. It goes through the halvings, and it makes it more and more scarce as our computing power increases. Crypto is such a fascinating thing because it kind of takes the model of real money, like gold, and it just puts that scarcity into the coding. It's so fascinating.
It is wild stuff that I think is it's a good way to go. I wish I would have started back when I was in high school and not, been a part of that, fear mongering side of, oh, this is a bad thing, you know.
Dude, I kick myself all the time because I heard about Bitcoin on 4chan when I was in high school, when it was 50 cents on the dollar. And I was looking into it and I was like, oh, the only thing this is actually used for is for illegal, untraceable transactions. And I have no imminent need for this. And I just think, like, man, if I just emptied my
I
high
have
school
no
bank
imminent
account
need
out,
for this.
if I emptied my high school bank account out on Bitcoin at 50 cents each, I'd be retired now.
Yeah, just your lunch money.
Yeah, I remember seeing a story online about a couple that decided that they were going to start living 100. They were going to like live for 30 days on Bitcoin only because apparently there were some places in New York that would accept Bitcoin as a form of currency to pay things. And so they started doing it and they lived for an entire month off of Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But I never really like understood or even tried to understand how it could be, and I wish I would have. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I honestly was definitely late to the whole crypto scene. Like the only way I knew about it was from people I've heard of that had like talked about the dark web, and like you said, illicit activities. And I didn't see it as a like a noble technology. It was just like some weird little way to do illegal things on the internet. So yeah, it's and recently, there was, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago. Actually, it's only been out for about 10 years, but a couple years ago, there was this whole crypto surge where it started to become mainstream. And honestly, I kind of like brushed off all of the people that were getting involved in crypto. Just kind of thought that it was some fad or something. And to a degree, it was. It went up from like 5,000 and it just shot all the way up to 20,000, and then it crashed so hard and so many people got wrecked. And honestly, I think I would not be surprised if some government was involved in that whole crash, because crypto is challenging money as we know it, and that's a very threatening thing. There's been wars started over less than what Bitcoin's trying to do.
Yeah, I remember China and Russia
And
hated
then
it
now you have,
for a while there. So like, seriously, they were,
I think Russia just barely banned it actually, but it's been like an on and off sort of back and
yeah, but
forth
like
thing.
lots of scrutiny and lots of media attention from a country that's relatively quiet in the headlines day to day. But it's challenging a lot. It's challenging everything. I think it's good. I think some of these things need to be challenged, and this is like the amazing thing about average people having the access to this kind of technology that we have is like we can challenge things now like never before.
Yeah, I agree. And I think definitely a big source of evil, I guess we'll call it, is money printing in general. I know we had a long discussion about this, Justin. I basically said the source of evil is money printing, and you kind of said that it was, just kind of adding to the current political corruption that's already there. And I definitely see your point to that. But there's for sure a lot of corruption involved with money printing, and I do think that one of the best, like morally good, like noble things that you can get involved with and put your effort towards is some type of real money, because that will basically take the power out of the hands of all the worst people in the world, because power attracts bad people, and money printing is the epitome of power. So I definitely think that, regardless of where it could go or whether you make a bunch of money off of it, I do think it's something that's actually represents a good transition for our society, especially now as we approach potentially the end of the fiat money experiment altogether.
Oh, dude, it's becoming heroin for our country. Like, we're becoming addicted to it. This is so dangerous. We need to get off of it. Like, even if there's the chance that it could end up helping us. I mean, like, I don't think this is the right way to manage a society at all. So I hope it comes to an end. We need another currency to end it almost at this point, really. Like, I don't know how else we break the cycle of just perpetually printing our way out of any solution.
It will.
Or any
It
problem.
will be absolutely fascinating to see if the fourth turning theory holds up, because it would say that basically we have 10 years, and each turning is supposed to last 22 years, and so the fourth turning technically started in 2008. And if you look at the economic data, we've definitely gone really downhill since 2008, even though the perception has been that the economy's been strong. Has actually been rotting from the inside out. And then the last 10 years of the fourth turning is supposed to be the part where it really intensifies, and everything you've been sweeping under the rug, you now have to pay for. And then at the end of that 10 years, there's always a change in the paradigm. And it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see if that holds up. Like, and of course it's never exact. It could be off by as much as like 5 years either direction. We could be in this intense stage for the next 15 years, or maybe it would only last 5 years or so. But
Oh God, I hope not the next 15 years.
I know, the prime of our lives, just like the shittiest economy ever.
But that's why. So basically, each turning is assigned a generation, and we're considered the hero generation because we are, millennials, because we are at our prime age going into the crisis historically. Like, the last hero generation was the people our age that ended up going to fight in World War II. So it's like the able-bodied people, the people are at their prime, ready to go into the crisis, which is pretty shitty for us, but it kind of does show the role that we play in getting society through these hard times.
Yeah, there's a lot of burden put onto our generation.
Yeah, I mean that's what they say when we keep going into more and more debt, is that eventually our children are going to have to pay for it. And we're the children. I think the children that are going to pay for it are now here.
Yeah, I think at this point, since we have to pay for all this stuff, we should get 3 votes, and the boomers should get half a vote.
Good luck.
No, I was actually thinking today, this is like totally insane, but since children can't vote because they're like mentally incompetent, like maybe it's like put like a cutoff, like over 75. Like, I mean,
Oh dear.
Both my grandparents got dementia. I mean, they probably shouldn't have been voting. They didn't know what was going on.
Yeah. Maybe there's a certain point when you age
Yeah.
out of voting.
Yeah, not
That would be an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean,
that
it would be, yeah, because you're not going to be alive for that much longer.
yeah, It's definitely. I mean, it's definitely a pretty radical thought. But
That's a tangent for sure.
something I think is way less objectionable. I think we should put a maximum on the president. Like, there's a minimum of 35. We should put like a maximum of like 55 when you assume office. So it's like you have to be in the prime of your life when you serve in office. I don't think that's unreasonable at
Interesting.
all. Like, if we can't serve as like
I don't
28,
actually,
being like, smart and driven, like I don't know. I think that's very reasonable. Like 35 to 55.
because I think it would be very smart to have younger people in office that are making the decisions, because the decisions they make absolutely affect them still for the rest of their
Yeah,
lives.
and you're maintaining like someone's in the
Where
peak of their like whole adulthood in that range. Like, that's when their mind's like, you have the
yeah,
experience, it's developed, it's not quite declining at that rate yet. I don't know. I don't think that's
mhm,
unreasonable, but it's definitely a little radical.
yeah. Have to be older than 25 though.
Oh yeah,
Well,
for
right now
sure.
right now 35 is the limit. So I'm saying, like, if there's like a
Oh, is
downward
it?
limit, like, yeah, you can't be younger than 35 and be elected president. So like, let's put a cap on it too, since there's already like this arbitrary, like, oh, so any adult can't just be president. Like, well, let's put a cap on it.
Yeah, I
Fuck it.
think maybe like
If
80 years old or so maybe would be a decent cap. But I think as a human,
80, you're
I
out of
think
your
as a
mind, bro.
human grows, if given the correct circumstances, you should be mentally and your level of wisdom should be peaking, around your 60s and 70s or so, to where you should be in that like prime just leadership role for society. Obviously, your body's no longer there. I mean, that's what the fourth turning would describe it as.
That
You have the people who are 0 through 22, and they're in their
retirement's at 62, dog. What are you talking about? That's when your social security kicks in.
That's true.
People
But
retire in their 60s.
you're still mentally influencing society until you're about 80
Yeah,
years old or so.
but if that's like the general age in which people generally leave the workforce, like, that's what we socially accept, is when people leave the workforce. Why are we electing people for the most important job at the age we've kind of forced everybody else to retire? Like, they like kindly encourage people to retire from universities and corporate jobs in their 60s, but yet we elect people deep into their 60s. I think that's a problem. I really do.
Hmm. It's an interesting thought.
I mean, I definitely think there could be. I think let's close out here pretty soon. We'll probably skip on touching all the military stuff. We've been going for quite a while, but I do think it definitely is a person to person thing. You could have a 60-year-old who's been nothing but brainwashed into serving the corrupt system their whole life, or you could have somebody that really blossoms all the way until their 70s and is just mentally growing that whole time. But yeah, it's definitely something interesting to consider, especially being the fact that they're not going to be around for too much longer.
Should we be basing our leadership on outliers or the standard? Like, I would say people who are thriving and working like vibrant careers into their 60s and 70s are the outlier, not the standard. Like, I definitely think we should be basing information on standards, not fringes. But that's, I could go on about shit like this forever.
Well, we'll go ahead and close it there. That would probably go off on that for a whole nother hour. So we'll go ahead and end it here. I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to us. It's been an absolutely thought-provoking conversation. So I'm really glad that I could talk with you guys tonight. And you know what? I'm sure we'll be having you on more in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.